Hey everyone, today's tutorial is going to be an intro to making plugins in Figma, and we'll be making a very simple plugin that just allows you to instantly create spacer variables in your local file, which just means that we'll be focusing on using the Figma's API for variables. This tutorial is beginner friendly as I'll be going over the setup of getting started with plugins, and the plugin itself is also pretty straightforward as well. To do a quick demo, this is the plugin that we'll be building. So essentially, let's say you have an empty Figma file and you don't have any variables, and we just want to instantly create a bunch of spacer variables. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run the plugin. And now as you can see, it creates all these variables, the token names, the values, and their scope will already be set to gap so that they don't show up in any other categories, which just means that if let's say I had two squares, and then when I go to apply the variable, I do see all of my tokens in the gap area and also in the padding, but I don't see them if I go to the border radii or if I have fixed width, I can't apply them from here. And so to get started with building the plugin, there are only three things that you need. The first one is the Figma desktop app, because in order to run the plugins in development mode, you need to have the desktop app. And then I'm also going to be using Visual Studio Code, which if you don't have it, you can just download for free from their website. So that's just the code editor. And then I also have the Figma API reference docs, just to something to reference. We'll begin our work in an empty Figma file, and we'll start by going to the plugins and then development, and you're going to do the new plugin option. Here you can choose between Figma Design and FigJam or just Figma. We'll do Figma, and I'll just do like spacer tutorial. You can name it whatever you want. Then we'll click next. And here you have three options. This to have a plugin template included, and the default one is just blank. Also the second one, so you run the plugin and all the changes take effect immediately. You don't do any configurations within the plugin. For this plugin, we're going to choose this second option and then do the save. You can save it wherever you want on your laptop. Then you should get this pop-up saying that the new plugin is created. Then we'll do open folder, and you can see all of your code right here. Then you're going to create a new window inside the Visual Studio Code, and I will just take our new plugin folder and drop it in here. So from here, there are a couple of configuration things that we need to do. First one, all of our work is going to take inside the code.ts file. And if you go in here, you can see right away that there are some red underlines which look like arrows. And these are not exactly arrows. It just means since this is a TypeScript file, we have the types missing. And if you go inside the README file, you can find the command here that you need to install those types. So from here, I'm just going to open the terminal and paste the command in here. Now we installed our types, and if you return to this file, you can see that there are no more red underlines. The second thing we need to do is to compile our TypeScript into JavaScript. So right now we have this file called code.js, and currently it just throws an arrow. To fix that, we're going to go to terminal, do run build task, and we'll need to do the watch. So now as you can see, this code got updated, and now it just takes whatever is in this file and transforms it into pure vanilla JavaScript and outputs it here. And this is the file that will be generating our plugin. Now that we have these two things set up, we can go ahead and test inside our Figma file the default template that was preloaded with this folder. So I'm going to return to Figma. We can click done. From here, I'm going to go to plugins, development, and here's the plugin that I just created called Spacer Tutorial. And so right now, all this plugin does is just creates 5 rectangles, all that have this orange color. Again, this is nothing that I added. It came with the template. We can now do a quick test to check to make sure that our compiler works properly and that we can then indeed edit stuff. So I'm going to go back to our VS Code. And then maybe something that we can do here is just, I don't know, add some other random color. Save. Let's delete this. And by the way, there's a command that you can use to run your last plugin. It's Command Option P. So now you can see I changed the color and those changes are indeed reflected. Okay, now we're going to delete this. we're going to return to our code.ts file. And we're also going to delete everything except the very last line, which just says to close the plugin after the plugin has finished doing its job. So we do need that one. And the first thing that we're going to do is add our spacing scale. I'm not going to create one from scratch. I'm going to use the modified version from the Chakra UI default theme. So what I'm going to do is just copy this and paste it in here. And we'll just make some modifications. First, I will remove this space wrapper, and then we'll delete this first one here. And then I'm also going to get rid of all the ones that are kind of have this half value. So first, I typically don't use such small values. And second, we can't have this as a Figma variable name. So all these half values, we'll just remove them. Now we have our spacer scale, and the next step would be to convert this from the rem values to pixels, because again, we'll be working with Figma, so we can save the rem value there. So now we'll create a new variable that will house our pixel values, and of course, we'll also write a function that will allow us to convert our rem values into pixels. So I'll begin by creating a new variable, and this one will be called converted spacing, and it will be empty for now. Now we're going to write the function, which pretty much will be iterating through every value here. And then we'll be extracting the rem value. Then we'll be making a pixel value and then running a function on the rem value to convert it from rem to pixel. And then at the last step, we would want to take our new pixel value and actually save it inside this converted spacing variable. So this first part was just iterating through all of these and then running a function that doesn't yet exist, which is just converting rems to pixel and then assigning the new pixel value to this converted spacing variable here. So now we're actually going to write the conversion function. So we'll call it rem to pixel, as I said here. And this accepts rem value. And here our pixel value is going to be rem value. We're using this to extract just the number from here. And we'll multiply it by 16. We're just assuming that by default, 1 rem is 16 pixels. And then we're going to return the pixel value. You can see that we have some errors here. Again, this is just because we don't have the type set. So we're going to add that now. Let's collapse this, and I'll just do that at the top. So our first one is going to be, chakra spacing, and it's a key number. So this is a number. And then our second here, we don't have a number, we actually have a string. So it's just text. And we're going to assign this type, chakra spacing. And then our second one is going to be converted spacing. This one is also going to be a key number. But then our value here is not going to be a string. We'll actually be saving it as a number. So this will be number. And we're going to put it here. And the very last thing is for this function, when we accept this rem value, we want to specify that it's a string that we're looking for. So now we don't have any more arrows. And what we can actually do now is to test, to check that our conversion works. What I'm going to do is at the bottom here, I'm going to console log the converted spacing. So now when I return to Figma and run the plugin, ideally in my console, I should see this variable with all the pixel values inside it. So we're going to return, and I'm going to open console so I can see what's going on. And now we're going to run the plugin. And as you can see, it outputted this object here which has all of the key value pairs. And instead of frames, these are now pixels. Now that we know that our conversion indeed works, instead of outputting it to the console, we can start using it to create our variables. And before we create the variables themselves, we also need to create a variable collection in which all those variables will live. So what I'm going to do now is first remove this console log. And now at this point, we can start referencing the Figma's API. So yes, we want to be able to create a collection, but it is something that we can actually do. This is why it's a good idea to go to the API reference and start checking for what options are available. So if I'm interested in variables, for instance, and let's type in variables, and it gives me a couple of things here. I'll just go straight to the API reference. And here I can see that, okay, if I want to do something with variables, I would need to type figma.variables. And then there are a bunch of functions. So I can get the variable by ID. I can get variable collection by ID. Here we go. We'll use this to create a variable, a new variable. But first we would need to use this function to create a new collection. So let's return to the file, and I will do it up on the top. We'll create a new variable to which we'll assign our collection. So collection, and now we'll use Figma variables, create variable collection. And as you can see, it autofills. So this is also just very helpful to know what functions are available. Then here we need to give this new collection a name. Let's just do example collection and save. So now once again, we can return to our Figma file and test this to see if that we indeed created a collection that's called an example collection. We'll return to Figma and we'll run last plugin. Now if we go to our local variables, we can see that we have a collection here that's called example collection, and we currently don't have any variables. So now that we know that this works, we can delete this collection. We'll return to code, and now we'll use this converted spacing set to create our variables inside the collection that we just created. So first, we're just going to check what we need to know when we create a new variable. Here we know that when we create one, we need to give it a name. We need to specify which collection we're adding it to, and we also need to specify the type. And the type could be like a boolean, color, float, or string. So for us, because it's going to be a number, we'll be using float. So now we're going to return to our code, and we're going to iterate through our converted spacing. So for key in converted spacing, we're going to create a new spacer variable. And we'll give it a name. So the name is going to be space slash, and then we'll use our key. And I'm using space slash because we want to group all of our variables under a group that's called space. Then our collection is going to be collection.id. And this collection.id I get from this collection variable here, because we assigned our new collection to this variable called collection. I can now use collection.id to reference back to our newly created collection. And then the last thing here is going to be float. So now we can go back to Figma, run the plugin, and you can see that it created a collection called example collection. We now have all of our tokens for spacers, but we haven't assigned any values just yet. And last thing, they all are grouped under one group called space. So once again, we'll delete this one. We'll go back to our code, and now we want to assign an actual value to our spacers. And here we just need to remember, so for variables, we can have multiple modes. So when we assign a value, we also need to specify which mode we assign it to, because for this tutorial, we're just working with one mode. We'll take the first mode and assign the value to it. What I'm going to do is do spacer variable, then set value for month. And now we'll do collection. Modes, we'll just take the first mode, mode ID. and then we'll get our value. Now when we return and run the plugin again, we can see that we now have our values. We're technically almost done, but there are a couple things that we can do to enhance this. Currently, we didn't set any limits to our scope, which means that if, let's say, I have a rectangle, I can go to radii and I'll have all of my space variables visible here. And the same is for like the width and the height. But ideally, we only want the spacer variables to show when we have auto layout, and we use it either for the gap or for padding. What we can do now is, one more time, I'll delete this collection. We'll return to codes. And here we're going to set the limit on scope. I'll do spacer variable, scopes, and we'll just use the gap. And if you're wondering where I got this from, once again, you can check in the API. So we'll search for like scope, and it has this variable scope page here. I'll go to it, and here you can see all the scopes that are available. The very last thing that we can do is, when the plugin has finished running and we've created the variables, we can just let the user know that we have indeed done that. And for that, we can use the little Figma toast notification message that pops up at the bottom of the screen. For that, I'll just do, right before we close the plugin, we'll do figma.notify, and we can say something like add spacers, and maybe do like a green check mark emoji. Now we'll return to our file. We'll run the plugin. You can see that it created all of our spacers variables. And at the bottom here, we had a little toast notification. And then if you go inside the variable configuration, you can see that we only have the gap checked for the scoping. And we can also test this by, again, let's create a rectangle, go to radii. You can see that we don't have the spacer variables showing up here. But if we have this auto layout and we want to set a gap, we do have the spaces available here. The same is for padding as well. Anyway, this is it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed learning this other side of Figma. Of course, currently we have our plugin. It's still running in development, which means that I'm the only one who can use it, and I can only use it from the desktop app. If I wanted to publish this plugin, there is documentation on how you can do that. It's a pretty simple process, so if you ever wanted to publish your own plugin, all you need to do is to fill out a couple of fields, and I think it takes maybe a couple of weeks for it to actually get approved. But yeah, there is documentation on that, which I will link in the description. I'll share the code for the plugin as well in case you want to reference it. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.